This conference will now be recorded.
I would request all the participants to kindly mute. Kindly switch your mics off, please. Mics, please. We'll be talking about so divide this lecture into two parts. First part is
What the hell is going on?
it better now? Okay.
This conference will now be recorded.
So we're talking about endometriosis and the pelvic region new topic. We're long time to prepare. So this is the topic which is anatomical from alternate sources, images and photographs, and proper citation references have been made in the during the lecture. Now, from a surgeon's practical point of view, anatomical knowledge and concept never be suggested to have a deep insight into the knowledge that we acquire and become a good surgeon. So, one of the problems with this fascia of the abdominal fascia to be an area where there's immense controversy, all anatomical descriptions that you can go through in the text, and there's so many controversies that it's very difficult to pick and choose which one to follow, which not to follow. So the optimal descriptions of any such fascia with best and easily explainable and pragmatic details should be followed. So that's what we'll be doing in this lecture, further down the lecture, right? Now let's see the orientation. What are we talking about? Now this orientation of the abdominal fascia and the pelvic fascia, if you look at this abdominal fascia, they together form bags. And this bag is basically enclosing all the interperitoneal organs, and the second bag is enclosing the pelvic organs. This you can look at it like a bag. So the endoabdominal fascia, which is also known as the transalis fascia, it encloses the abdominal cavity structure. Now look at this yellow line. This is the peritoneum. And outside, if you look at the blue line, the transalis fascia going up, so it is lining the undersurface of the diaphragm, going behind retroperitoneum, and then in the sagittal plane, there's a midline, it would be going deep into the pelvis. While in the parasagittal plane, out of the pelvic outlet or inlet, if we like to call it, it becomes the parietal pelvic fascia, right? Now, this is the transalus fascia, the peritoneum, and in between the two would be the preperitoneal fascia, and then the loose extraperitoneal fascia. We'll talk about that, what that basically means. So this is like a bag. See, this is like a bag enclosing everything inside. Now, if you look at this fascia, the transalus fascia, anteriorly from the undersurface of the diaphragm, it comes and lies under the rectus abdominis muscle. Undersurface, enters the pelvis on the posterior surface of the pubic bone. So this is the pubic bone. So it is entering into the pelvic cavity, where it becomes a pelvic fascia. Okay. Posteriorly, this fascia is going to merge with what? All the retroperitoneal structures out here. The muscles, namely the iliacus, the psoas, and the gordus lumborum, which are the innermost muscles in contact with this fascia. The pararenal fascia, if you look, this is the kidney. And there are two fascia of the kidney. So it's going to make contact with those fascias. And medially, it gets attached to the transverse process of the vertebrae. Right? This would give a better picture for you. This is the fascia. This is the transverse process. Can you see this? The red. This is the transalus fascia going underneath the peritoneum. So this is the peritoneum. Underneath out here, the transalus fascia. I picked up a number of figures so that you can easily understand this. So this is the lateral orientation transalus fascia lining the whole of the body cavity. And this is the posterior orientation and the anterior. This is the anterior, this is the posterior orientation. Okay. Now, where does it attach itself? So from the diaphragmatic fascias coming down posteriorly, the whole length of the iliac crest. This is the iliac crest, the whole length of the iliac crest. And where exactly in the iliac crest? In between the attachments of transversus abdominis muscle and the iliacus muscle. See, this is the iliacus muscle, the transversus abdominis muscle origin, and here you'll find the attachment transalus fascia. So up to the anterior iliac spine, it comes and attaches itself there. From there, it is lying just behind the inguinal ligament, just behind the inguinal ligament, attached to it. So the posterior margin inguinal ligament, and then is continuous with the iliac fascia, becomes continuous with the iliac fascia over here. Now, here there is a gap which is known as the vascular orifice. It descends into the thigh as the anterior wall of the femoral sheath. So it's traveling from here, attached out here, and part of it comes and forms the anterior wall of the femoral sheath. Now, medially, it goes and attaches to pubic tubercle, and from there to the pectineal line, which is lying behind out here, right? Giving rise to the iliopectineal ligament. Okay. Now, it gets reflected as a lacunar ligament or not. That's questionable. Why? Because lacunar ligament could be a part of the inguinal ligament, or it could be a part of the transalus fascia. There's still debate about that. Okay. Now, this was just the orientation. We are not gone to the details. It's just the orientation, the initial orientation that we were talking about. Now, as far as the pelvic fascia is concerned, just a few words about the orientation. If you look at this figure, this is the pubic bone, the bladder. Here you got the vaginal, and here you got the rectum. So this fascia descends along the wall. This is the wall of the pelvic cavity. Descends along the wall. So these are the muscles which are forming the wall, the levator ani, the obturator. We'll go to the details later on. So all the muscles. So this is the parietal fascia, and from here it gets medially reflected on either side to go and coat the right. So that is how the pelvic fascia is arranged in the pelvic cavity. Okay, now let's talk about the transalus fascia, the endoabdominal fascia in the supravesical triangle, the medial inguinal fossa region, and the underlying space of Lynceus. So what are we talking about? We're basically talking about the median umbilical ligament. We all know that. That is basically the obliterated urachus. You can see the fold very clearly seen in this photograph. You can see the medial umbilical fold, which is the obliterated umbilical artery. Part of it remains behind as the superior vesical artery here in this region. And then you got the lateral umbilical fold, which is the inferior epigastric artery. So initially we were talking about the transalus fascia in this particular area, because this forms the supravesical fossa. The supravesical fossa from the midline to the medial on one side, midline to the medial on the other side. So between the two medial umbilical ligaments, you have got both the supravesical fossas or one single supravesical triangle. right? And beneath this, you would be having the space of rhythmias. Now, let's see the transalus fascia. This is one thing which is very, very difficult to understand, and that is in context of the TEP operations that we do. Now, I'll come to that just in a short while. So basically, I've just not told you that it is lining the undersurface. So here somewhere you got the diaphragm, this is the pubic bone, okay? Now, the transalus fascia is lining the undersurface of the erectus abdominis sheath, posterior erectus sheath. See, this is the sheath. So the fascia is lining out here. Now, here the posterior erectus sheath stops. So what happens to transalus fascia? The transalus fascia then further descends going up to the pubic bone. Now, the problem is that this part of the transalus fascia, which is from distal to the arcuate line to the pubic bone, that is an area where the transalus fascia is very, very variable in its consistency, in its appearance, right? It is replaced by an extremely thin and translucent or nearly transparent lamina or transalus fascia, which may have some fibers of transversus abdominis aponeurosis included. Okay, so remember one thing, that this is a very, very flimsy layer, often may not even be seen. Now, inner to this, we got another layer, and that layer is what we now know as a vesico-umbilical fascia or the umbilical prevesicular fascia. And what is this fascia all about? This fascia is a fascia which is incorporating what? The urachus and the umbilical vessels, just lying underneath the peritoneum in this area. Okay. Now, where does it come from? Where does it go from? So from the umbilicus, it proceeds downwards, covering the peritoneum. So this part of the peritoneum being covered, then it covers the extraperitoneal part of the bladder and going and descending down behind the pubic. So laterally, it is going to cover the lateral pillars of the bladder and the bladder. Okay. Now, what is the transverse extent of this? Is it between the two medial umbilical ligaments, or is it between the two lateral umbilical ligaments? That is the controversy. The controversy, every time you'll have some controversy. So this is the controversy, whether it's between the two medial or between the two lateral umbilical ligaments, the blue line or the yellow line. Okay. So the consensus now is that this is the fascia which extends between the two medial umbilical ligaments. So this fascia, remember, is extending from here in a triangular fashion, going up to the umbilicus somewhere out here. So this fascia would be something like this. Okay. Now, so how does the vesico-umbilical fascia relate to the rhythmias space? Okay. Now, what is the space of rhythmias? This is basically a space which we initially believed was just lying behind the pubic bone. This was the pubic bone, behind this bone. That means a space here. No, it's not a space there. It is a space right from the umbilicus down to behind the pubic bone up to the pelvic diaphragm, meaning the levator ani muscle. So this is a space extending right from the umbilicus up to the pelvic diaphragm. Somewhere here, the pelvic diaphragm somewhere here, right? Now, so laterally inside the pelvis, there is no problem. Inside the pelvis, the lateral limits of the space of rhythmias is the lateral wall or the bony pelvis, meaning thereby this would be the lateral wall of the bony pelvis. So very easy. What about when the space of rhythmias comes out of the pelvis? That means inside the abdomen, what are the boundaries? Just now said whether it is the medial or the lateral, but now we believe it's most commonly the medial, that is the green line. Okay. The second controversy is, so that means now we know the lateral extent between the two medial umbilical ligaments. So the cranial extent, the umbilicus, down up to the levator ani, laterally the two medial umbilical ligaments. That is now been agreed upon. Laterally, is it closed or is it an open space? Now, there are, in the literature, you'll find that there are a number of references which say that it is connected to the Bogrov space. Okay, so the lateral extension of the space of rhythmias would be the Bogrov space, somewhere in this region. Okay, now, is it really connected or not? That is still open to question, controversial. What they believe is that this is a closed space. Why? Because the two layers are fusing. Which two layers are we talking about? The layers between which you have the space of rhythmias. Okay. Okay, I'll just show you the next figure. And they say that if you find that there's a communication, it is probably a result of your dissection, which shows that there's a connection between the space of Bogorov and the space of Rincés. Okay, so what are the anterior and posterior boundaries of space, which is very, very controversial. Now see, we've got three fascias out here. You got the posterior rectus sheath, we've got transalus fascia, we've got the vesico-umbilical fascia, we've got the peritoneum, and we've got the bladder. Now the space of Rincés could be either between these two fascias, the yellow line. Which two fascias? Transalus fascia and the vesico-umbilical fascia. Or it could be a space between the bladder and the vesico-umbilical fascia. See the two spaces out here, 1 and 2. So which one is it? Which one is it? Now that is still controversial. There are references. I'm showing you these are authentic references, which says that the space of Rincés lies between the two layers of transalus fascia, that transalus fascia which is lining the undersurface of rectus abdominis, and the vesico-umbilical fascia. Reference is in front of you. The other is a Sandlakis, which is considered, he was considered to be an authority on surgical anatomy. He says no, that's not the space. This is basically a space between the vesico-umbilical fascia and the bladder. So you've got two views to this fascia. If you look at this cross section, see this cross section, the transverse cross section, and you find that this is the fascia transversalis, these are two recti, fascia transalis, and this is the vesico-umbilical fascia. So by and large, people believe because this is a more roomy space because of a lot of extra tissue. So this should be known as the space of Rincés. Agreed? So now you know the controversy as far as the lying of the space of Rincés is concerned. Where does it lie? See this picture. This is basically the area what we're talking about, the space of Rincés out here. The pubic tubercle, there's the operate area, the lateral walls of the pelvis, that's the operate area. You got the pubic tubercle out here, the pubic bone, the pubic symphysis can be seen out here. So there's a space of Rincés, half of it. And this will be the full space of Rincés. So inside the pelvis, the lateral wall is by the lateral wall of the pelvic cavity. Outside, it is the medial umbilical ligament. Is that clear? Now, why are we so worried about the space of Rincés? Let it be, whether it's lying here or there, it doesn't make a difference. It does. Why? Because when you're talking about space of Rincés, two things are very important for us as surgeons. Number one, the dissection should be very, very careful. And number two, it should be adequate. Why careful? Let's talk about the first one. Why should it be a careful dissection? Number one, because apart from the loose connective tissue and fat that is lying outside there, there are important vascular contents which need to be protected. Vascular content which we all know of, and that is the normally present obturator vessels and the nerve. This is the obturator vessel and the nerve out here. See, obturator nerve, obturator vein. So these are obturator vessels and the lateral wall of the pelvis. This is the lateral wall of the pelvis. You'll find the obturators. These are the obturators. Agreed. So far, so good. You need to protect the external iliac vessels. So far, so good. So we have protected this and we have protected this. And then we are very happy that we have protected everything. And then with abandon, you go on dissecting. And the next thing that you know, there's a lot of blood everywhere. And you try to stop it, it doesn't stop. What has happened? You have forgotten about the abnormally present vessels. Remember corona mortis. This is corona mortis, the yellow area. And why is it known as corona mortis? Because there are a number of abnormal vessels. And what is the incidence? You may say, okay, really it is there, so I'm not very worried about it. No, it's more than 50% of patients would be having some kind of abnormal vessel out here. And what are these abnormal vessels? Most commonly, the accessory obturator vein, which is much more commonly found as compared to the artery. And from where is it arising? It's arising either from it's supposed to arise from where? The internal iliac. Instead, what it's doing? It's arising either from here, the external iliac, or it's arising from the inferior epigastric. That means either directly from here or this is the inferior epigastric from here. See this connection? See this connection? That's aberrant obturator artery and a vein. This is the vein, this is the artery. So when you are dissecting this particular area, so this is the whole of the pubic bone. When you're dissecting, you're trying to drag the transalus fascia down from pubic bone. Remember one thing, if you find any vessel, any capital A and Y, any vessel which is crossing across. It means at right angles to the long axis, there's the long axis of the pubic bone, at right angles to the long axis of the pubic bone, that is an abnormal vessel. Please don't touch it, don't damage it. Any vessel, any vessel. So what are these vessels? Accessory obturator vein and artery, I told you. Atypical arteries and veins, either from the infraepigastric, accessory, or from the main vessel which is supplying the bladder, to the bladder. Visceral continuation aberrant obturator, supplying the vesicle. Or there could be retropubic branch of accessory obturator, a retropubic branch out here, or a suprapubic branch. So behind the bone, you can have a suprapubic or retropubic vessels, you can have the accessory vessels, and you can have the atypical arteries arising from these accessory vessels going and supplying the bladder, which is lying somewhere out here. In addition to this, 10% of patients would be having an accessory pudendal artery or a vessel. Now let's see where the pudendal artery is, just to make you understand what we're really talking about, because if you don't have any figure in front of you, you'll not be able to understand anything. That's why I picked up these figures. See, this is basically the internal, the anterior division, posterior division. Okay? Can you see this? Common islet, external, internal, anterior, posterior division. Now from the anterior division, you have this group of vessels, the artery and the vein, which is the internal pudendal. That is the usual route that it takes. 10% of the time, what happens is it arises higher up from here and it crosses the prevesical space to reach the dorsum of the penis in this fashion. So instead of lying low down, it is lying above the levator ani. So here you got the what? The pelvic diaphragm. Beneath that you got the perineal diaphragm. Normally the pudendal vessel should be lying in the perineal diaphragm, below the perineal diaphragm, in the ischiorectal fossa, lateral wall. Here what happens is really 10% of cases lying above the levator ani and crossing the prevesical space and entering into the dorsum of the penis. Right? So beware, in the lateral wall of the pelvic cavity and the anterior wall of the pelvic cavity behind the pubic bone are a number of dangerous vessels which are present in almost more than 50% of individuals, where the dissection has to be very, very careful. Is that clear? So now we know why the dissection should be careful. Why adequate dissection? Because we want to put in a mesh ultimately. If you're doing a repair of a hernia, whether it is a inguinal hernia or a ventral hernia, you have to put in a mesh. It has to be a mesh hernioplasty. So the mesh should be absolutely smoothly, uniformly spread out. There should be no wrinkles. And if that happens, your dissection is adequate enough. If it doesn't, your dissection has been inadequate. So now we know the clinical importance of the space of Ritzius and the dissection of transversalis fascia in the space of Ritzius, right? Now, let's come to these arrows. What are these arrows and how are they important? What are the controversies? Very good, we said that stops the arcuate line. This is a posterior rectus sheath. Arcuate line stops. Transversalis fascia continues as a filmy structure up to the pubic bone. So far, so good. But there's a very big but. And that but is that this arcuate line is a very, very variable arcuate line, meaning thereby that the length of the posterior rectus sheath, which is supposed to stop somewhere in between the umbilicus and the pubic bone, midway, what is known as the semilunar line, the arcuate line, it may not be doing so. It may be stopping very short out here, or it may be very long, spreading even up to the pubic bone. So you cannot be absolutely sure that the arcuate line or the posterior rectus sheath will stop only halfway down. No, it can extend for even a longer length right up to the pubic bone. So the length of the posterior rectus sheath is very variable from a very short to a very long length, and that's why the position of the arcuate line varies. This varies. Okay, the transversalis fascia beneath the rectus, the posterior rectus sheath, and going further distally, as I said earlier, is very flimsy, and you may not be able to identify it in a number of persons. Often not identifiable at all, because it's very difficult to identify it. And then, of course, the vesico-umbilical fascia is again a variable thickness. It can be membranous, it could be very thin, it could be just be it could just be replaced by extraperitoneal tissue. You may not even find a resemblance of a middle structure. But at all times, if it is present, it is very, very thin and lax. And why is it thin and lax? Because it has to accommodate the bladder. When the bladder fills up, where is it going to fill up? It fills up towards the abdomen. After all, when you have a extension of urine, where do you palpate the bladder? Beneath the umbilical. Why? Because the bladder enlarges in this area. So this fascia has to be, can't be a tight fascia. It's a tight fascia, the bladder cannot expand. So this is a very, very loose fascia. Right. Now, what are these arrows? Now, when you're doing a TEP operation for the postgraduates who know that, because this is the umbilicus, and from here, just infra-umbilical, you create a path. Now, what is the path that this takes? Remember, when you're pushing or you're retracting the rectus laterally, you find the glistening surface of the posterior sheath. That is the first view. Make an incision, retract the rectus, and then in front of you, what do you have? You have the posterior rectus sheath, which is a glistening white structure. And then you maneuver your port in such a way that it does not go through the sheath. Through the sheath, you're going to cut through the peritoneum. So pneumoperitoneum. You don't do that. So then the path that it takes is up to the arcuate line, and then from the arcuate line through the transalis fascia, umbilical, vesico-umbilical fascia, and into the extraperitoneal area. That is the route of the trocar in a TEP operation. I hope you remember that. You would remember that, right? So it has breached the skin, the rectus has been retracted, you reach the posterior rectus sheath, you slide along the upper surface of the posterior rectus sheath, go up to the arcuate line, from the arcuate line, then you take an oblique course through the transalis fascia. If it is present, if it's not present, you may not even be able to identify it. I'll show you a couple of pictures which shows the types of transalis fascia. And then from there, it goes into the space of Ritzius, and either through the vesico-umbilical fascia is present. If not, then you have this whole area where you find the space of Ritzius, right? So now you know where the TEP trocar is going to go. Now, I'll just show you a couple of clips. See this? Can you see this area? This section going on. The pubic bone. Okay. This is the medial. This is space of Ritzius. I'll run it just now. Space of Ritzius, just to tell you what we are doing. And this is the area. Down. Again, medially, see, you can see the lighthouse. Can you see the pubic bone out there? See the pubic bone? We're dissecting into the space of Ritzius out here. You can see number of veins lying parallel, no problems. Anything running across, problem. And you're trying to push the peritoneum away, and you can see this structure. Can you see the structure being cut? That is the structure that you're looking for, and that is what is the cover appearance. This is the cover appearance of the very woolly cover appearance. If you're identifying that appearance, you're in the correct plane. If not, you're in the wrong plane. So whenever you're going a dissection, the dissection has to be very, very importantly in that particular area. We'll again refer to that in the other clips. Space of Ritzius, see the space of Ritzius, the pubic tubercle coming into view, and you have gone into the area. The bladder is lying somewhere here. That's the bladder area. There's the pubic symphysis, pubic tubercle out there. See, that's the pubic symphysis. Can you see the symphysis? So this whole thing is the space of Ritzius that we're talking about. Okay, the dissection has to be such that you don't damage any of these vessels. Okay, now let's go further. Now let's talk about further laterally. We talked about supraesophageal layer. Let's go further laterally, and that is the endobronchial fascia, transalis fascia in the inguinal or the subinguinal region. See, this is subinguinal region, the inferior-epigastric. You got the lateral triangle of the indirect inguinal hernia, and you got the direct, through which you have the direct inguinal hernia, and below down that is the femoral. This slightly wrongly labeled. It lies just below that, right? So what about transalis fascia in the inguinal area? So as this transalis fascia, we showed you that even below the umbilicus there is a second layer, and that is the vesico-umbilical fascia, which is of variable consistency, very fragile, could be very woolly. The discrepancy is there. But as this fascia now proceeds more laterally, it becomes thicker. Both the layers become thicker, and the inner membranous or second layer also becomes more identifiable. So now you have the two layers being identified. Look at this picture. Going in, transabdominal muscle, and in behind this muscle, you got one layer, two layers, and peritoneum, and third layer. Can you see the three layers? Layer number one, known as fascia transalis layer 1. Layer 2, known as fascia transalis layer 2, or the posterior layer. And then you got the extra peritoneal, and you got the peritoneum. Agreed? Now, the controversy now is layer number 2. Is it really a layer of transalis fascia, or is it a fascia which belongs to the extraperitoneal head? And now we all understand and believe that we are basically talking about a pre-peritoneal fascia. So now we no longer have two layers of fascia transalis. We have fascia transalis. We have pre-peritoneal fascia, which was initially known as transalis fascia layer number 2, now known as the pre-peritoneal fascia, right? That is the controversy now more or less settled. And then you have got the extraperitoneal loose areolar tissue and the peritoneum. So three layers: loose areolar tissue, pre-peritoneal fascia, and transalis fascia. Is that clear? The three layers. Okay. Now, the problem with layer number 2 is that often may be very flimsy again. So in every dissection, you try to identify layer number 2. Layer number 1 is easily identifiable, more or less, but layer number 2 may not be identifiable very clearly. But you have to recognize, or you have to look for layer number 2, because that is the layer where you have to go in for dissection. Means what? Means basically the subinguinal vessels, they are lying between layer number 1 and 2, not in layer number 2. That means they are sticking. See this figure. See this figure. Fascia, anterior lamina, posterior lamina. This is an old nomenclature. What is known as posterior lamina is now the pre-peritoneal fascia. And see the vessels, they're lying between layer number 1 and layer number 2. So where do you dissect? Behind layer number 2. And what is lying behind layer number 2? It is the pre-peritoneal fascia. See the yellow? That's the pre-peritoneal fascia. So fascia transalis, the yellow is basically layer number 2, and there in between the green and the yellow is the extraperitoneal tissue, where you go in for all kind of dissection, right? Now, the transalis fascia forms the whole of the posterior subinguinal. That means behind the inguinal area, the whole of thing is being formed by that. So that means it is covering everything. It is covering everything. Now, here in this region, in the region of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, there is an area where there's the arching fibers, and this is known as the Achilles heel of the groin. Why? Because this is the only weak area where you only have what? You only have transalis fascia out here. But remember that this posterior wall is not always flimsy. There are a number of instances where it can be replaced by even extension of the muscle. So you really don't have complete arching fibers. You can have an extension of transalis abdominis muscle and internal oblique muscle extending right of the pubic tubercle. Very commonly seen in females, young adults, and children. That means that the posterior wall of the inguinal canal is not always made only of transalis fascia. It is often a combination of transalis fascia and the anterior lying muscles, which are got very low arching, and they almost making the whole of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. This can easily be understood from this figure, right? And this transalis fascia, when it is covering the whole of this wall, it has got only two weak spots. One weak spot where there is an egress of the deep inguinal ring, egress of the cord structures, and number 2, the inferior vascular orifice, where the external iliac exit and become the femoral vessels, and the transalus fascia accompanies these vessels as the sheath. See this? This is the second area. The second area. From where? So this whole thing is the transalus fascia. So one weak area is this area. See the cord structures coming here. So this is the deep inguinal ring. And from here you got the vascular orifice, from where you got the femoral vessel. So 2 weak spots on transalus fascia. Right? Now, the importance of dissection in this particular area cannot be stressed enough. Why? Because if you go and dissect in between 1 and 2, you're going to damage all kinds of vessels. What are these vessels? Namely, inferior epigastric. Medial to the inferior epigastric, you got the Bender-Witt arcade, you got the accessory obturator, you got circumflex iliac veins, and you got the retropubic veins. All of them lying in between these two layers. So if you're in the correct plane, you may not be worried about these veins. Why? Because in the correct plane, absolutely avascular. I'm not going to damage anything. So while dissecting, what is important? While dissecting the preparietal space, the space where you have to dissect, that is behind layer number 2, always remember, number 1, the dictum has to be remembered. Fat always belongs to the peritoneum. What does that mean? That means when you're dissecting, the fat should come down with the peritoneum. Vessels belong to the anteabdominal wall. Leave the vessels with the anteabdominal wall. Don't try to drag it down. Is that clear? So fat belongs to the peritoneum, vessels belong to the anteabdominal wall. Inferior epigastric vessels should never be allowed to fall away from the wall. If they are allowed to fall away from the wall, you are in the wrong plane. If the vessel, this vessel starts falling down, you are in the wrong plane. You lie dissecting between layer 1 and layer 2. Always identify the loose, woolly or cowboy appearance of the plane of dissection that I just showed you. I'll be again showing you that. If the plane of dissection is correct, you will not require a cautery. You will not require an energy source. Why? It is a bloodless dissection. Remember that. And too much forceful or too blunt dissection should not be done. In both the instances, if you're carrying out a lot of blunt dissection, you cannot too forceful, dragging of the transalus fascia back, then you're liable to injure the vessels. Clear? Now, we talked about subinguinal space of Bogros. We said that if you look at this figure, what vessels are being damaged out here? See, epigastric vessels, we are going to damage the Bender-Witt arcade. So what is this Bender-Witt arcade all about? Accessory obturator, we showed you what they were. Circumflex iliac, we know it goes across the lateral side toward the ASIS, antisphenic spine. The pubic and the retropubic, we all know all that. But what is the Bender-Witt arcade? You look at the Bender-Witt arcade, this is basically an area. Let's imagine that we are looking from above, So we're looking on the left side. So you got the iliac fascia, the iliac muscle out here, ASI is somewhere here. You got the parietal peritoneum and your transalus fascia below, and this is the area going to the reticular space. Now this transalus fascia below is the pre-peritoneal fascia is here, and this is the transalus fascia, which is the fascia which we know as layer number 1. So this is a space lying between layer 1, layer 2, which is now PP. Now known as the Bogros space, which is the green space shown. So that in all workshops and all descriptions, you'll find that this whole thing lying lateral to the medial umbilical ligament being labeled as the Bogros space. But the initial Bogros space was a very, very small space, right? It is considered to be the lateral extension of the space of Ritzius. Why? The space of Ritzius is somewhere out here. The Ritzius space is here. So that is going to be extended out here. And a lower extension of the posterior paraurinary space. I'll just show you what this basically means. And the contents of this Bogros space is what? The Bender-Witt arcade, which is fixed to the wall. Can you see these veins out here? See the veins. These are veins which are coming from the rectus lying out here. So these are rectusial veins which are making contact with the inferior epigastric. This is the Bender-Witz arcade. This is the Bender-Witz arcade. So how is it made up of? Is basically the inferior epigastric, the iliopubic vein, rectusial meaning the veins draining the rectum, the rectus, rectus 1, rectus 2, rectus 3, and they all make a common arcade. So the iliopubic, the inferior epigastric, the deep circumflex iliac, and together you may also combine in certain instances twigs from the testicular vein, twigs from the pampiform plexus, and they all come and join and form the Bender-Witz circle. So what is the applied importance of this? The applied importance is that when you're trying to drag transalis fascia in the subinguinal area, as you're doing in a DAPP repair, a DEP repair, or DAPP ventral hernia repair, you should be very gentle. And the veins seen on the anti-abdominal wall should not be damaged. They should not be tried to be dragged down. Don't do that. If you do that, you're going to create a problem for yourself. See the veins, much clearly seen out here. You see the veins? So these are the Bender-Witz veins. Inferior epigastric, veins out here. Here you have the rectus, and these are the veins which are draining the rectus. So these are rectusial veins. Inferior epigastric rectusial veins. So this is basically the. So when you're dissecting, remember what is being done. The inferior epigastric artery is being pushed up. You drag the flap down, push this up. So you're entering where? You're entering into this plane. See this woolly appearance out here? Cowbell appearance. This is the area that you'd like to see. If you're into this area, you're very happy that I'm dissecting in the correct area. Now, just a photograph. I think this photograph may not be very clear for you. Let me show you some clips for this. Okay, now see. Space of radius, you can see the pubic bone. What is this? What is this structure? This is the rectus, rectus out here. See this very thick structure? Should there be a fascia there? There should be no fascia there. This is the transalis fascia, which is very thick. That's why I picked up this picture to show you. I told you that the transalis fascia below the arcuate line up to the pubic bone is usually very flimsy, but it's very variable. You may have a very thick fascia. See this thick fascia? This is the pubic symphysis. Okay, so this I wanted to show you between the two recti. There's the posterior. The woolly appearance. See the woolly appearance? That's what you're cutting. So whenever you're doing a dissection, if you're cutting this particular area, you're in an area where you're not going to get too much damage. So here we have managed to damage one of the vessels. Even this should not be there. If you're in the correct plane, this should not be there. See, we are going laterally. Now, can you see this layer? See this layer? See this layer? That is the preperitoneum. So we're trying to dissect in between. Again, this is the peritoneum, the loose space, and the preperitoneal fascia. So remember, whenever you're trying to dissect in this particular area, always look for the cobweb. And if you're looking for the cobweb, you're in the correct plane. Okay. Now let's talk about the posterior extension. What is the posterior extension of the transalis fascia? So now we know we have looked at the anterior, the midline. We have gone more laterally. We've gone more laterally, the subinguinal area. And now let's look, what does the fascia do now? Now this fascia, if you look at this figure, see this fascia is coming from here and then it goes back over the iliacus muscle. And remember, in the description we said it becomes combined with the posterior paranephric. So the transalis fascia and the preperitoneal fascia curves backwards, continues upwards as the iliacus fascia. Ascending up, it would continue finally where? See the posterior layer going up to the diaphragm. Agreed? But anteriorly, it has a number of connections. See this connection. This is the fascia. Now, the kidney, anterior rectal fascia, and you got the posterior rectal fascia, Gerota and Zucker cantle. Together, they have a loose interfacial plane. So, two fascias, loose interfacial plane. And this is the spot where it makes contact with the transverse fascia. See this area? This is the area. So just proximal to where the transverse fascia merges with the iliac fascia, that is where it's merging. See, just proximal to that. Just proximal to that. There is a loose fusion of Girotas and Zucker-Kandel, which continues as the great posterior paravenary space. Paravenary basically means lying behind the kidney. So there's a posterior paravenary, anterior paravenary. Okay, perinephric. So it is basically a continuation of posterior paravenary space, and it attaches to the iliac fascia. So there is an area out here where these three fascias, or rather I would say four fascias, are merging with each other. Transverse fascia, iliac fascia, the anterior renal, which is the Girota, and posterior renal, which is Zucker-Kandel. Right? They all merge with each other. And just to make you understand, the anterior Zucker-Kandel is only strictly the name given to the posterior paranephric, and anterior paranephric fascia is known as fascia of Zerota. Loosely, both have been intermingled, that both can be known as Zerota, both can be known as Zucker-Kandel. If you are strict enough, you want to have a correct anatomical knowledge, that the anterior fascia is Zerotas and the posterior is the Zucker-Kandel. Okay. Now, while stripping the transverse fascia away, so when you're doing a dissection, you're going to strip it away from here. While stripping it away from the iliacus and the psoas, do not strip the psoas fascia. Please do not strip the psoas fascia. Why? There'll be neuralgia. Why should there be neuralgia? Because the number of nerves lying out there. See this? See this? I've purposely inverted this. This is a direct representation. Right side, right side. Now, if you look at this, genitofemoral nerve, two parts, femoral branch, genital branch. Okay? Lateral nerve of the thigh. Can you see this white structure? And over that, you can see the filmy structure. That is the psoas fascia. We have not touched the psoas fascia. And that is what is required. Do not touch the psoas fascia. Go further laterally. This further laterally. Anticephalic spanning somewhere out here. You're going laterally. The medial, lateral. This is the lateral part. This is the medial part. Just like here. Medial part, lateral part. So if you look at this, this is the ilioinguinal nerve. Can you see this? Ilioinguinal. And if you do further dissection here, that will turn out to be the iliohypogastric. And you can see this is the fold of the peritoneum, which has been stripped away above over the psoas muscle. This is the psoas muscle. Here would be the iliacus. So this becomes the iliopsoas. So this is the psoas muscle. You got the genital branch. It will be entering where? Into the deep inguinal ring. Then you've got the femoral branch. You got the lateral nerve of the thigh, and you got the ilioinguinal nerve. That is how it should look. The filmy structure should be there. It should not be stripped off. Let me show you what should not be done. See, again lateral dissection, anticephalic spine somewhere out here. Can you see this nerve? Can you see this nerve out here? Now this dissection has been very deep. This dissection has been very deep. And that is one dissection which should not have been done. This nerve should not have been exposed. See? See this vein? See this vein? Should a vein be running across? No. This is what? An accessory operator vein. Infraepigastric. From the infraepigastric, the operator foramen is lying somewhere out here. This is the vein coming into the operator foramen. So this is just part of the thing that I just now noticed. I want to show you that the iliopelvic tract is somewhere here. See the white structure, the iliopelvic tract. I'll just show you. So the nerve should not be bared. Remember that. Do not try to dissect the nerves. Never try to dissect the nerves. Why? In doing so, you're going to give rise to a lot of neuralgia in the later part. At the post-operative. Now see, this is the layer of transverse fascia seen very well. Now see, what is this? What is this structure? See this structure? This is the ptosis of the infraepigastric vessel. The infraepigastric vessel have been dissected out, and now we have gone too deep, and we have gone in front of layer number 1. It should not be done. In front of layer number 1. That is one area which should not be done. That's why I showed you these two clips, that this is an area where it should not be done. Because if you do that, then you're going to result, or the ultimate result is going to be a lot of neuralgic pains in the postoperative period. So once you've done the whole dissection, the transverse fascia dissection should be such between layer 2 and the extraperitoneal. That means preperitoneal fascia, behind the preperitoneal fascia, in the extraperitoneal loose areolar tissue, it should be such that you can define all these three areas: the triangle of pain, the triangle of doom, and corona mortis. I'm not going to go to the details of this, but I've just labeled this for you. This is the radius space, the pubic bone, the pubic tubercle out here. You can see the vast difference. You can see the testicular vessels. You can see the triangle pain, which is further laterally down here. You can see one of the part of the ilipubic tract, which I'll show you in one of the figures again. If you see the pubic tubercle, it will be going from here and comes like this. So that's part which not been dissected completely, right? So the posterior extension. Let's talk about posterior extension. So we now know that it's been climbing up. It's climbing up. So what is relation with the Geroda and the Zuckerkandl? So see, this is the perinephric space. The two fascias, the anterior fascia and the posterior fascia, they together laterally, they join together to form what is known as lateral conal fascia, which then joins with the transalis fascia. And this is the bloodless line. When you're doing a mobilization of the colon, if you mobilize in this line, this is a junctional plane, it would be absolutely bloodless. And what does it signify? That bloodless line of colonic mobilization is a line which signifies the junction with the transalis fascia and the peritoneum, and basically the area that is the two lateral conal fascia, a combination of Geroda and Zuckerkandl. So this is the area. That is where you have the mobilization of the colon. So that is the important. Now, medially, see the transalis fascia, we said, is attached to the transverse process, and it is also covering the psoas muscle. To cover the psoas and the transverse process. Okay, and here in this region, it will be known as the psoas fascia, because the name of transalis fascia or overlying muscles is derived from the name of the muscle cell. Okay, and the separation between these two fascias is always filled with what? Is filled with loose areolar tissue. So there will be a tissue between transalis fascia and the Zuckerkandl fascia. It is not fused. They're loosely adherent to each other. There's a loose tissue out here. Geroda is anteriorly. There's a loose tissue out here, right? So in this area, the retroperitoneum, three spaces, perinephric. You got the anterior perineal space, blue, the red posterior perineal space. Okay, so these are the two spaces, and these two spaces are continuous across. The anterior space is continuous across towards the opposite side in the retromesenteric plane, behind the pancreas. It is continuous out there, right? Lying in front of the major vessels. And these are the areas. I'm not going to go into the details of this. Why? Because this basically does not deal so much with the transalis fascia, which we're talking about. But just remember the perinephric space. This is the perinephric space, which will be having the kidney. It will be having the adrenals. It will be having the proximal ureter and bridging septae, known as Counin's septae. These are the Counin's septae. Can you see these septae, which are anchoring the fascia to the convex surface of the kidney, and some vessels and lymphatics. Whenever you're mobilizing the kidney, you would have noticed there's a lot of bleeding out there, even without touching the renal vessels. Where is the bleeding coming from? This is basically coming from the vessels lying in the perinephric space, right? So this thin lamina anteriorly known as Geroda's fascia, posteriorly Zuckerkandl's fascia. Is that clear now? So that is the perineal spaces for you. Now, medially, I said, I just not told you, I'm not going to go into the details of that. It is communicating with the opposite side, lying superficial to the major vessels. Okay. The perinephric space, we look at the perinephric space. One thing important is that if you have any kind of pathology out here, collection in the perinephric space is going to track down and can go right up to the psoas. Why? Because see, this is a loose adherence between the Geroda and the Zuckerkandl. That means the two layers of perinephric fascia are loosely adherent. So anything can track down from here and can track down and go right up to the, it can track down from here and go right up to the ileus psoas area. Is that clear? So that's what I want to show you. That's why I had not put it on. Now, just a few words about the deep inguinal rings. This is not a typo mistake. This is a correct spelling. S. Why S in the rings? We only knew about one deep inguinal ring. So where does the second ring come from? Now we know that there are two deep inguinal rings. And these two deep inguinal rings are basically the secondary and the primary deep inguinal ring. The primary deep inguinal ring is opening in transalus fascia. See, muscle, transalus fascia, the preperitoneal fascia, which was known as initially transphalangeal number 2. This is now membranous layer of extraperitoneal fascia, the PP fascia, the loose extraperitoneal fat, and the peritoneum. Now we understand that. At least now this much is absolutely clear to us. Okay. Now, the two fascias which are membranous, if a structure is going to come from the extraperitoneal fat and come into the inguinal canal, it has to breach both these fascias. It can't breach only one. How can it do that? It has to breach both the extraperitoneal fascia and it has to breach the transalus fascia. So the breaches in these two fascias have been termed as the deep inguinal ring and the deep inguinal ring and the secondary deep inguinal ring. So you have the primary and the secondary. Primary is what we always knew, that is a defect in the transalus fascia. But what we didn't know was that an underlying defect in the membranous part of the extraperitoneal fascia or the PP fascia, which should be known as a secondary deep inguinal ring. And where the cord, see here you got the cord, or rather the vas deferens is curving from medial entering deep inguinal ring and into the inguinal canal. Now where it is curving against the preperitoneal fascia, it is thickened. See this area, it is a thickened area. I give you the reference. You can find this reference. If you want to read it up, you can see the reference. I've referred everything. So this is the area which is thickened. So when the vas deferens is going to curve from lying in the extraperitoneal plane from the space of Retzius, it ascends up and enter the deep inguinal ring, it has to come through the PP fascia and then the transalus fascia, only then it can enter the deep inguinal ring and the inguinal canal. So where it is abutting on the PP fascia, the PP fascia is thickened. It is thickened, right? I've tried to show a diagrammatic representation. The peritoneum, membranous PP fascia, transalus fascia, transabdominis, right? So when this is the thickening in the PP fascia, and this is the vas deferens entering into the inguinal canal. Inferior vessel which form the medial boundary of the DIR. This is the DIR. What form the medial boundary? The inferior vessels and the commissive vessels. So these are forming the medial boundary of the DIR. So this is lying lateral. So this is the DIR. Okay. So the second layer of the PP fascia, it is dividing the subinguinal area into two. That is the parietal part and the visceral plane. The parietal plane is the plane which is lying between 1 and 2, already referred to. We said inferior vessel lies there, the Van der Waals circle lies there, the chromatic vessels lie there, and so on and so forth. What are the visceral plane? That is the layer behind layer number 2. So whatever is lying behind number 2 are all there. That means the ureter is there, the gonadal vessel is there, the vas deferens is there, the medial umbilical ligament is there, the medial umbilical ligament is there, they're all there. So the applied importance of this is that the preperitoneal space has to be entered even when you're doing an open inguinal hernia surgery. And how would you identify that? You'll only identify that when you have a pouting of the extraperitoneal fat. If you don't have a pouting of the extraperitoneal fat, you may have dissected up to the neck. You're very happy I've dissected up to the neck and you tie it. Have you dissected the neck until you see the extraperitoneal fat? No. You have to do a sharp dissection, a sharp cut over the preperitoneal fascia. Only then the fat is going to bulge out. Let's see this. The sac being dissected, a very small. I've taken a purposely very small clippings. See the white structure there? The transalus fascia coming into view. Now, can you see the structure that has been held down? You can see the structure and you can see the fat now coming out here. So until you cut, so this is the second layer which has been cut. Until you cut this layer, you're not going to have a bulging of the fat. And until you have the bulging of the fat, you cannot be sure. Once you have the bulging of the fat, only then you can be sure that you have reached the neck of the sac, and only then you have to go in and ligate. See the fat now? See the fat? The fascia now being cut everywhere. You can see the fascia very clearly now. See this fascia, the cut fascia out here. Okay, so that is the preperitoneal fascia, layer number 2, what we knew as. Now I can go inside, right? So this is basically the area which is important and should be seen and should be dissected. So until you do this part of the dissection, you have not done a complete dissection of the sac. Is that clear? So this is the dissection which is required for the preperitoneal fascia. And just a few words about the transalis facial analogues and the importance. We all know the important analog. This is an inside view. That means we are seeing from inside, the right side. The rectus abdominis is there. You find that there is a structure out here, which is the transalis facial sling. Can you see this sling egg structure? This is the transalis arch. You have the iliopubic tract and the Henle's ligament. So what are these all about? These are basically the thickenings. As remember, I told you, as you go laterally, the subinguinal area, the transalis fascia thickens. It thickens, and the thickening becomes often so much that it gives rise to specific identifiable areas in the fascia. And these are identifiable areas in the fascia. You have the arch, you've got the sling, you've got the iliopubic tract, and you've got the Henle's ligament. Okay. Now, let's see what this is all about. And what are the important? What are the clinical importance of these analogs? Why do we need to know these analogs? One is the anatomical importance. And the anatomical importance is redefine the Hasselbalch's triangle. The Hasselbalch's triangle we always knew was basically the lateral edge of the rectus abdominis, the inferior epigastric, and the inguinal ligament. We always knew that. But I've been repeatedly saying that, and a number of texts say that a triangle geometrically is a biplanar structure, a uniplanar is a planar structure. That means all the structures should be lying in one single plane, which if you use this definition, the conventional definition, they are not. Rectus abdominis lateral edge lies in a different plane. Inferior epigastric is preperitoneal. Remember that, layer number 1 and layer number 2 of the peritoneum, and inguinal ligament is the superficial most. It is a part of the external oblique muscle. Inguinal ligament is what? Part of the external oblique. So you're taking the help of three structures or lying in three different planes and trying to define a triangle. Doesn't make sense. So why not use structures in one single plane to define a triangle? And what is the structure? The structure is transalis fascia. So can we use structure transalis fascia to redefine the Hasselbalch's triangle? Yes, why not? Take the sling, take the arching fibers, and take the iliopubic tract. All structures in one single plane. So the Hasselbalch's triangle can be redefined as the triangle lying in between the arch, the sling, and the iliopubic tract. Number 2, the second anatomical importance of the iliopubic tract is that, see, it is reinforcing the lower edge of the deep inguinal ring. This is the deep inguinal ring. See this? So it's reinforcing the reinforcement of the lower margin of the deep inguinal ring. Physiologically, what is the clinical importance? The physiological clinical importance is that we knew about the shutter mechanism, that when the abdominal muscle contracted, the arching fibers of the internal oblique and transverse abdominis, they straightened up, descended, straightened up, and approximated to the inguinal ligament, thus trying to fortify the weak area or the Achilles heel in the inguinal area, that is the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. We knew that. But why not redefine it by the approximation of fibers in one single layer? And what are these fibers? The fibers, it is straightening and descent of the arch to the iliopubic tract. That is the shutter mechanism. So the shutter mechanism, to start with, it is initially an approximation of the transverse facies arch to the iliopubic tract, and subsequently anteriorly the descent and straightening of the fibers of transverse abdominis and internal oblique and inguinal ligament. So it is a double shutter working out here. It's a double shutter, not only one single shutter, double shuttering. Okay. What about the surgical importance of these analogs? The Cooper's ligament repair. The Cooper's ligament repair was a repair where you're using the iliopectineum. Iliopectineum, you're approximating the fibers of the transalis facial arch to the Cooper's ligament. That's the Cooper's ligament repair. Added strength to the weak wall. That gives added strength to the weak inguinal. And if you're using structures which are ligamentous or which are fibrotic, the sutures are going to hold much better as opposed to a suture in a muscular, in a muscle. A muscle does not hold suture very well. A ligament, a tendon holds it much better. Aponeurosis holds it much better. That's why suturing or sutures applied to transalis fascia would be much better withheld as compared to sutures applied to the muscle. Right? Just to show you the figure, this is the iliopubes tract. See the iliopubes tract, which is skirting. This is the radius space, the pubic tubercle, and this skirting, the deep inguinal ring, this skirting. What is this? This is the arching fibers of the transfacial arch. Here you will be having the sling. You will be having the sling. Can you see these fibers out here? Fibers going like this and going out here. So these sling. Then you got the arch, which is coming from here, going up to the pubic tubercle, and this is the iliopubes tract, which is cutting the lower margin of the deep inguinal ring. So I think that is all I want to tell you about the transalis fascia, and I think probably it must be somewhat clearer than what impression you had in mind up to now. It should be much clearer than what you had in mind, and I think I've tried to take the consensus of opinion, because I told you repeatedly the number of controversies in this discussion, but I've tried to pick up the area which is more understandable and explains all the logical steps in a TEP repair, a TAPP repair, and the area where you have bleeding, why should you have bleeding, why do you damage nerve, why you don't damage nerve. So that is all dependent upon the transalis fascia. If you know the correct area of transalis fascia where you're going to dissect, then none of this is going to happen. So you can easily forget about the three important areas, the corona mortis area, or the triangle of death, or the triangle of pain. You can forget all those areas if you're in the correct plane of dissection. If you're not, then you have to be very, very careful about these planes. Now, tomorrow, I think we'll be talking about a much more important and much less understood topic, and that is the pelvic fascia. And that's why I've kept it separately for tomorrow, because that is again a big topic. Thank you for today. Thank you for being with me and sparing your time. If you have any questions, you can post them on my WhatsApp, and I'll be happy to answer them tomorrow. I think we'll finish for today. Thank you.